Regular meeting Monday, April 3rd, 2023 at 7:05. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
United States. Public stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very much. Roll call, Lori.
Thank you. Mayor Linehan,
Here.
Councilor Page,
Here.
Councilor Kendall,
Here.
Councilor Martinez,
Here.
Councilor Papen,
Here.
Councilor Sheldon, Councilor Smith.
Here.
All right. Thank you very much, Lori. There is my proposal. All right, item number 5 on our agenda is the consent agenda. This evening we have the April 3rd city council agenda to approve, and then we have the March 20th city council minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes that we need to be aware of? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda for April 3rd, 2023.
Second. All right, we have a first and a second and discussion. So your approval is just the consent agenda for the April 3rd agenda? Okay.
That is correct.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And nay? Hearing none, motion carried. May I have an approval, a motion to approve the March 20th, 2023 city council minutes?
I'll move to approve the March 2023 city council minutes.
Second.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Any abstentions? I will abstain.
You'll have to. Okay.
All right, thank you. Item number 6 is our public comment. And this is the time that we wish folks wanting to speak on matters here in North Plains that are not on the agenda. And where do we have any submitted?
Nothing submitted prior to tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you. We do, I am going to ask you though to come on up to the table. and I'm sure most of you are saying, this gentleman. So I am going to allow him to speak during this public comment period and introduce himself. And then if you have any questions, just call that great. So.
Well,
Tom, just keep it pushed in, then it should turn on there.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Now I can be recorded, right?
There you go.
Good evening, Mayor Linehan, councilors, staff. I'm Tom Paul. I'm your lobbyist in Salem. Is about a month and a half ago, Andy got in touch with me and told me about your need for some representation in relation to the semiconductor initiative and your urban growth boundary expansion. I can give you a quick update about where we are. Tomorrow is a big day in Salem in that all bills have to come out of their originating policy committees in order to continue in the process. So what's going on in relation to your particular issues? Senate Bill 4 passed the Senate last week on a split bipartisan vote. Several Republicans voted no, under mainly very concerns from the agricultural community. And now it's in possession of the House. That bill will come out in joint committee, so it goes directly to the House floor, not to another committee. And we expect that it will be up for a floor vote in the House on Wednesday. And it's reasonably normal on the floors, and you expect that bill to pass. And be on the governor's desk for the likely signing. We understand that Commerce Secretary is going to town, but thank you for that. Signing the bill. What Senate Bill 4 does, as you may know, gives the governor extraordinary power to remove or revoke boundaries for purposes of CHIPS Act citing, and also limits what lands that you can put within the growth boundary. The land that you all have been looking at for your expansion all qualifies. Related to Senate Bill 4, there's measures through the process that we hope to get out of committee by tomorrow. That respect to that would impact the funding for site readiness and also tweak some provisions that are important to this Oregon just heard from. Really technical changes, but create a little bit more flexibility to go in line with the semiconductor initiative. We've got a ways to go. While all this is on, in legislative terms, on a very fast track, I expect the funding pieces will not fully resolve themselves, as most funding things resolve themselves after the main forecast comes in from the state economist toward the end of May. But we're doing pretty good about where things are going. I think North Plains is very much in the conversations about semiconductor initiative. Nothing's guaranteed, of course, but when folks in the hallways are talking about where might this actually happen, North Plains and Washington County are high on everybody's top of mind. So that's just a real kind of fast update. As we turn past the deadline, I'll be focused on funding issues. The substantive policy stuff will be pretty much on its own. So I'm in touch with Andy and Bill frequently for their technical expertise. It's been a really good working relationship so far. So it's a real privilege to me to be able to represent your city.
I really appreciate you representing the city, and it was interesting. Tom and I actually met in the halls of the Capitol on C-Day before we even hired him here, and so we had a nice little conversation about North Plains and that sort of thing. So it was a pleasant surprise when I found out that we had actually went through that process and hired him. I thought, oh, I feel like we're in good hands. So. So that was really nice, but thank you very much for all you're doing and for advocating for us. And we're really appreciate that. Any questions or comments from any of the councilors? Councilor Smith.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, you're one counselor for us. How many counselors does like Hillsborough have? Love this thing.
Mayor Lanahan, Councilor Smith, Hillsborough has one full-time person in-house, and then they have my colleague Leah Becker is retained by them to represent them day-to-day.
I'm just curious how much pressure Hillsborough put on compared to what if you've been in there for a while. Do we have any advantage over Hillsborough?
I wouldn't call it necessarily an advantage, but I think we're on better. We're as we have these conversations about what needs to happen for the state to be able to cite some of these plans and what's needed. Hillsborough has challenges of its own where they have to do some of the great land bargain a number of years ago. So, in comparison, I think we're very much in the running. North Plains has things to offer, like not having to really change other than actually moving the boundary, you're not having to figure what the land classification was. So it's Hillsborough has to get over that traditional hurdle of getting the governor to say it's okay to reclassify land and then make it, well boundary expansion. The other piece that's coming up is infrastructure related to site readiness. Really, they have more or less the same issues that one Plains does. Wherever that boundary is expanded, things like water and heavy duty utilities have to be expanded.
I was just curious because I know that the county plans ordinance by Metro Hills and just wanted to cover this into that.
I'm sure she's listening to them to some degree. I think they're some of what ended up in Senate Bill 4 reflects input from groups like Thousand Friends and some of the restrictions on what type of land can be brought into the road boundary timelines. Some of those things are a direct result of Franklin's pushback against the land initiative. The initiative has strong bipartisan support, so I think we're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Paige?
It's very hard to hear. It sounds like people are talking underwater. So I'm trying to really listen. I have no questions because I missed a lot of it.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Hi. So if North Plains would get the interest would come up, rise and come out here to look at this. And we're not structurally ready infrastructure wise, are they gonna overlook that? Because we don't own the land that's west of town. So how does that work? What do you see? Do you see any inconvenience to that or is that a negative for us or not? I'm just curious.
From what I know about the situation of the land surrounding your town, you're very similarly situated, maybe even better than some of the communities that we have a very small number of landowners, which I understand from Indian Bill are very willing, and so
That's a plus.
it's a real plus just where you are, being not even 10 minutes down the road from Intel and the infrastructure that you already have close to a major highway, you got an interchange, so those pieces are already there. So I think in terms of looking at sites, the governor's folks understand very well that wherever something is cited, there is going to be substantial infrastructure work that has to be done.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, Councilor Page.
I missed a lot of the first part of it, so excuse me if this has already been asked and clarified. I'd like to try to ask it again for my own edification, if you will. The CHIPS Act has been on the books for, people have been talking about it for a couple of years now. Lots of manufacturing has been done in other states for two reasons. One is diversification. They're not all focused in one area, so they have bigger workforces and get along with different states and get some incentives that way. Besides, why would a company, large chip company, want to be over here in Oregon versus someplace else that doesn't have manufacturing and people are hungrier for it? Because a lot of our population and education is being used up by the existing companies. Is that a problem where we're like barking up, whereas we're making a lot of noise, but the odds of us having anything come to fruition is pretty slim because the money's already been allocated, perhaps?
That's a great question. And, you know, I'm not an expert on economic development, but, you know, I think just from a, you know, lay perspective, which is really what a lot of our electeds are looking at it from as well at the state level, is that, you know, we are a major manufacturing center for microchips. We have not just Intel down the road, but, you know, some others, and a very large workforce that's already in the tech sector. And so those are big pluses. And I talked about just a little bit of that as I got here. That if we have, you know, in terms of education sources, we have Oregon State, OIT, Portland State all have good engineering programs, and so there's some of those pieces are here. Are we in competition with other states? I imagine we are. But you know, I think what's being done at a state level to take advantage of the Federal CHIPS Act is about as much as we can do. And at least the feedback I'm hearing is that we're in the hunt for, if not landing a very large site, then of great interest to kind of the next tier down, but it would also be very significant for a place like North Plains.
Thank you. That's what I was fishing for. It's to figure out whether we're in the hunt or just chasing a car that's already driven off. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Page. Thank you, Tom.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
really appreciate the update. All right, moving on to our next agenda item, we have resolution number 2225. This is addressing the deficiency in internal controls audit report for FY20. Andy, Bill, this is you. Okay, great. It's your item.
Bring it off.
And I just want to make a clarification. I did say 2225, but it looks like we have two resolutions, correct?
That's correct, Mayor.
I don't, yeah,
Yeah.
2225 and 2226.
That is correct. Yeah, there are two resolutions and they're extremely similar. So that's what, and one staff report that went out in your packet, that they're so similar. One staff report was all that was needed. Resolution 225, the first one, pertains to our fiscal year 2019-2020 audit that was recompleted recently, reissued. And resolution 226 applies to the recently newly completed audit of fiscal year 2020-21. That was finally very recently completed. For both of the audits, the independent auditors, Polly Rogers and Company, found various deficiencies in internal controls that are similar to ones that have occurred in the past, but they kind of called out very specific ones. When an auditor identifies that there are deficiencies of internal controls, and what I mean by that is to boil it down, during the process of processing payments and taking payments and doing journal entries to make sure accounts have been accurately attributed for different revenue or expenditures, or things have to be changed around, there have to be two eyes at every step of the way. Someone's doing the work, and then somebody else at a critical key point looks it over and reviews it and approves it. And that always has to be happening. There always have to be at least two eyes on everything that our finance department does. Through fiscal year, so for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, the finance department didn't always have two sets of eyes on everything. Certain things didn't always have initials and date and the word approved on invoices every single time. Certain ones were caught where that didn't exactly specifically happen. In some instances, it wasn't clear that the bank reconciliations at the end of the month were approved in the proper way, and therefore following months were following reconciliations that were previously approved formally. So it's things like that. And so when auditors identify that there are these sorts of deficiencies, they call them out in the findings report for each audit. And the state requires a city to adopt a corrective plan of action. And in that corrective plan of action, which for each of these resolutions, there's a corrective plan of action pertaining to the auditor's findings for both of these audits. And so resolution 2225 would adopt the corrective plan of action for addressing the deficiencies for fiscal year 20. And resolution 2226 would adopt the corrective plan of action for the deficiencies in the internal control deficiencies in fiscal year 21. All of these are in the past ways. We're talking about audits that are 2 and 3 years old. And so, as I'm sure you reviewed in the corrective plans of action for both fiscal years, we have endeavored to and successfully hired staff. We had staff depart in fiscal year 21 and in fiscal year 22. And as a result of longtime finance department staff departing, we hired new staff on with far more experience and training and experience with proper internal controls procedure. And attached at the end of the staff report is actually the detailed matrix of the process we go through with all of our processes that we were not doing before. Okay, we attempted in certain ways previously, but it never got forgotten, that sort of thing. Not now. So a lot of the corrective plans of action reflect that we have implemented the new steps and new procedures. And so for fiscal year 22, when the audit is done, and certainly for fiscal year 23, you should have very different audit findings, or far fewer as a result. So having said that, each resolution adopts the corrective plan of action for that respective fiscal year's audit, now that they're both done. And I'm happy to stand for questions, but passing each one individually would be necessary, and each one would address each fiscal year's audit individually as well.
Any questions for Bill? On the page?
Not necessarily a question, but more of a statement. I totally appreciate audits. The council gets monthly, we get statements, and we kind of go over the budget and we see line items, but we don't get to see how the line items are actually made and what they come by. And we're looking at it from a very high level view, and it's great to have, just a second set of eyes on it, and then the state goes over it. So I totally do appreciate this process that's going through. And some things were found, and there's a corrective action. That's perfectly normal and perfectly fine. So that's all I gotta say about that.
Thank you for that. Any councilors here have a question and comment? Okay. What is the wish of council? We have 2 resolutions. The first one is resolution.
Well, maybe it's more of a statement. I hold the administration accountable for this. That's internal and cross controls are essential in conducting the financial activities of any organization, big or small. And to me, some of these are, at least through the matrix, I went down through the matrix. I'd like to see us have a report card on how we're doing on this at least every 6 months. Because in my mind, this city has been subject to fraud in the past. And it doesn't come to me lightly that how we let control slip is to me our first priority to our taxpayers who pay their taxes. And so I'm glad we have the audit, yes, because we need to take corrective action, and it's clear. And I'm not saying there's anything going on that concerns me other than clearly, having auditors find this, you know, to me, the significant deficiencies are somewhat problematic. So, you know, I'm hoping that we'll get some sort of an update at some point in the future. Now, I'm a stickler for it. I'm not, you know, having this happen, finding some small oversights that's going to happen. But to me, some of these things are a little bit bigger than that.
Thank you, Councilor Shelton. That's our intent, is to get these things corrected, and we can certainly provide a progress report later this year on how things have been corrected. And I'll just say too, I'll take that responsibility. I commend Bill for coming in and hiring some good people. That's step one, is it fixes a lot of things. You know, we had different employees doing things that they weren't necessarily trained for years, and that's not the case anymore. So that a lot of these things are going to take care of themselves. But I appreciate what you're saying, and even small things can lead up to big errors in fraud and all sorts of things that need corrective action. So we take all of those seriously.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure we're taking it seriously, because to me, this is serious business. And I will, unless there's other questions, I'll move to approve resolution 2225.
Second. All right, we have a motion on the table for resolution 2225, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carried. The second resolution is the 2226 to adopt a plan of action for independent auditors finding for FY21. Any discussion? Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve resolution 2226.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion second. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8, new business, 9, anything unfinished. It's not reported here. We're down to city manager's report. And Andy, it's maybe like highlights.
A couple items I'll talk about at the next meeting, because it's URA business. I guess related to the conversation prior to this during the work session, you know, we have our water suppliers, Joint Water Commission, and we have a water supply agreement with them that's phased over 20 years. We're about 5 years into the 20-year, no, we're about 18 years into the next 20-year plan. That was really based a lot on population growth and some business growth. That's changed a little bit since the agreement was signed with, you know, potentially semiconductor activity, or at the very least more employment land as part of the UGB. So we're going to start having conversations with them about looking at the agreement again, and just looking at, you know, the region as a whole, where water suppliers are, if it means that we have to look, you know, for different sources. So we're open to that, and we're going to do what we can to sort of set the position, or put the city in the best position for the future to accommodate any sort of employment land growth, and also knowing that, you know, we're doing a water rate study right now, and we're committed to kind of stabilizing rates, or not, you know, jacking them up or anything like that for the next few years. So that's not going to happen. But we're also wanting to look ahead towards the future too. So we've been doing that along with some of the other industrial readiness discussions. I guess a couple other things. I did put an infographic that Corinne made based on the community survey. I thought that was kind of nice. It showed some of the top takeaways for folks, and I had an article in the newsletter that just showed the community. These are what the priorities were, what the goals were. Like these are the ways that we're addressing them now, or that we plan to address them, so that's there for the community to see that if you answer a survey, we want you to know that your concerns were heard. And then lastly, the planning still continues apace for the 60th anniversary meeting, and Doug put together a nice little flyer for us today. And I've had at least one business offer to help sponsor, underwrite some of the events. So he also made a donation form. So if you know of any business that, I mean, it's the 60th anniversary of North Plains, I think we'll probably be able to get some business partners. So if you think of any, just let me know. Happy to share a donation form and the flyer and information like that. And we can get them whatever they need for tax purposes too. So.
Any questions or comments for Andy?
Yes, I've got two.
Mhm.
One with this meeting we had earlier on the UGBs. I know the acreage of the housing, there's an idea how many housing units are going to be in UGB?
In the two areas, if you remember the map, it's the yellow. Yeah. Well, we'll get into this in 2 weeks. Exactly. Thank you for that reminder, because we are going to have another work session. It's a double work session month. Sorry about that, but it's kind of important times right now. But at the next meeting in 2 weeks, we'll have a joint work session with the Planning Commission to go over the map recommendation that was made by the Project Advisory Committee. And then we'll get into more about the report. We have to submit a report to the county and to the state and what that process is going to look like. Because it won't be long after that. In May, in fact, the Planning Commission will have the UGB amendment at their Planning Commission meeting. But to your point, for housing, it's about, I did this calculation not long ago. It's over 1,000, and I think it's less than 1,400, but it's somewhere, let's call it 1,200 units, give or take, based on the acres that were, that came out of the housing needs analysis.
You've got 1,400 houses available.
Well, the other thing that's going to be interesting, and if you saw it in the, I think it was the Hillsborough Tribune, I recently read it, but some of these climate friendly, equitable community, CPEC, some of these regulations that were adopted that apply to the larger cities, metro areas with public transit, they're not going to apply to North Plains. And from a housing perspective, you know, some of the parking requirements won't be there, you know. So there are some things that I think, you know, the housing in North Plains, if, you know, I still want to get a grocery store, but some things we still need to do to make this community more complete. But I think, you know, there will be some areas where North Plains will be very attractive, you know, just from a variety of perspectives. But I mean, that's the other thing we haven't talked about either is later this summer, we start the concept planning process with a state grant. And we do have the ability to have a lot of housing right next to a lot of employment, which is, you know, we talked about Hillsborough a bit. Their big influx of housing is in South Hillsborough, and on the employment's in the north. So we, just by virtue of that, are going to have a lot more nearby. I mean, we really will have pedestrian walkability, bikeability, mobility, you know, just areas that people can kind of commute to and from work if it winds up that way. A lot more connected. Yeah.
We have a better housing outlet in our area here for industrial than they do.
Mm.
My other question was, planning commission looking at one section there with the housing, not housing, but the fencing part. And I brought up last time, I think it'd be a great idea if a couple of them actually block the area. Well, some changes need to be. So they have a better idea instead of just looking at it on the screen. Has there been thought process about them actually doing a walkthrough? Myself and the mayor did a few weeks ago. I think you get a better perspective on walking through it
Mhm.
and trying to look at it on the screen.
I know a couple of them have. It's not anything I've coordinated, but we could certainly send them a note to say, before the meeting next week, we would encourage folks to go out there and take a look in person on the ground.
Not sure how loud these microphones are going to be, so. Andy, would you be able to provide any more insight into the violence from our and the vertical team? Is there any discussion about the fence issue, like are you cooperative? Is there really anything to update there that you can share?
I only attended the first one for a bit because I had a meeting conflict myself. I think Doug takes part in some of these because he's part of the planning department, but they're really, I'll let him chime in, but they're really high level about, what's your timeline, any issues with your development timeline? What about, any permitting delays or your SDCs and everything like that on track? Are they turned in? Talking about improvements to the road, whether that's North Avenue or the turn lane on Shady Brook, things of that note. But Doug, maybe you have something else to add.
I would say that in terms of the non-fencing related issues, that it's been quite diplomatic and quite productive. In terms of the fencing issues, they have been definitely trying to skirt the rules, and Steve has, I've witnessed that Steve has had to hold them accountable as they are trying to jump the gun on the code changes. And one of their higher level executives, David Force, specifically said that he was going to build 6-foot fences in all the houses now, all the new houses, before we even talked about changing the code. So we had to push back on that and say, hold on, wait, we're gonna wait until we actually have a meeting about this. We talk about what those changes in the code are gonna look like. But currently, our code is what the code has not changed, and we need to follow our code. So besides that, though, it has been very productive and diplomatic. It's just been some small hiccups where they try to get away with a little bit more than they should be able to.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like going forward, we won't see this issue again, right? So we're addressing that now. And
Yeah, I would say this is a very good thing that we're focusing on, because even if we do make these code changes, it will set the tone for how other developers approach us, and we need to make sure we're holding all of these developers to a high standard, just like any other city would. And I think city staff and planning commission, city council have been navigating this well.
okay, thank you. My next question is great again. And can you share a little bit more about the GOA property that was that had some people trespassing? And I really just wanted to know, did the people that previously lived there do by their own accord? Did they thought it was on a marshal food? Or what does that look like? I didn't really know what was in there, so I just wanted to go a little bit more.
On the Glencoe property? Yeah, okay. I will discuss it now as opposed to the URA meeting. Yeah, they were given notices 90 days ago, or no, more like 120 days ago. This was back when, Yeah, so we had that previous discussion and, so there's three homes occupied. And I've worked with all of them, extended the deadline on all of them, just giving folks as much time as they need. One of the homes, they found a place, they were gracious, they were great to work with. Another, it took a bit longer. But frankly, those homes are not in safe, great condition. And once you get inside, you see how they have been neglected and none of the issues had ever been reported to the previous owners or to us. So that to me, I thought was unsafe. And then the third home is still occupied, but we've been working to resolve that issue as well. So, and there's some outside help helping them out to that tenant to get them relocated, get a dumpster and things like that to move the contents. So we gave a 90-day notice. That's the state law. In many cases, it was 120 days. And we worked through, several issues with them. We were patient and things like that. One of the other items, though, that I was going to mention later was that, yes, there were some squatters in one of the homes, actually in both of the homes that were discovered, because the police are doing checks for the properties to make sure that no one's in there, that shouldn't be in there. In those discussions, though, the sheriff's office does use abandoned homes for training purposes, and we have that ability to do that. And when they complete a training exercise, they'll actually board up the areas the same, if not even better, than they were in a previous condition. So that's something I'm entertaining. What they do before they do an exercise is they let all the neighbors know. They send them a letter. They give them notice. We could do probably some sort of social media post too to let them know, hey, if you hear a banging, this is what's happening today. And but it's for that sort of, it's a SWAT training or some sort of training exercise they'd be doing with dogs, maybe even two. Just kind of depends.
We've done that. They've done that before years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I remember hearing about that with some homes. So if that's something the council is fine with, I'm happy to move ahead with that with the sheriff's office, and we would do probably like a 3-month arrangement until we have some solid movement on a development plan there.
I think it would be aware of more of an impact for those folks that are in that Lennar area. Really, it sounds like.
Oh, Kimmerman, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm sorry. Yeah. Just make sure that they really communicate so people don't get.
We're gonna have one that White House that
Yes.
was on the end where they did the private drive homes, they did it down there. which
Okay.
Baker had did it a whole spot.
Yeah. And was that fine? Was it no real issues?
I saw Chief Baker and stuff, but I knew the home was abandoned, but yeah, probably was.
Yeah. And that was part of the discussion is if anything's going to happen, I mean, this is our main thoroughfare and there are 12 homes right behind it. So just communicate ahead of time with some correspondence and a letter and that what's going to happen. So, okay. If that's, I'll take that as a nod and that's something we'll probably do. And then that way it's used actively as a training site and then they board it up better when they're done. So. Okay.
My last question for you, Andy, is about the non-injury crash on Stewart and West. And I just wanted to know just a little more about that. I know that's something I brought up previously about that corner is with continually a magnet for some sort of crash. And it's right where our pedestrian walking path is and the school bus stop. It sounds like it's a little bit slow moving to try to get Washington County and to do anything about that or lower the speed limit. And just wanted to know A, what happened, and B, if there's any more teeth with Washington County now that there's been another crash.
Well, to your first part, I really don't know more about what happened than probably what's been reported. And Chief knows more about that, and I think he maybe even spoke about it at the last meeting, but I don't know a lot of details. But to your second part, yeah, in communications with staff, they're willing to lower it to 40 miles per hour, and they still have to do a study process for it. I would just say, and I think I've said this to maybe one or two folks before, also at the next meeting, our county commissioner is going to be in attendance. It may be worth bringing up to just voice those concerns of safety. And he's walked that road with us before there was a path there, and got to see the safety concerns. And it's probably just worth bringing up again. And then that may be able to apply a little bit more pressure. It could even have the ability to at least lower the speed limit where those homes are, something halfway, West Union is what, mile and a half long, something like that. So maybe a greater portion of it could be lowered if they want to keep some, but yeah, they're always going to be stuck on, well, the lower half of the road is rural, it's not in the UGB, and that's just like their sticking point for that. So, but it may be worth bringing to the county commissioner again.
Thank you. And, same thing in Bethany and over on Kyler Road in Lane Law, same thing, where our house is right there, 35 miles an hour, that's a county road. And, I just think about a livability factor.
Yeah.
And it's not safe to be on that walking path, and it's just a matter of time before something tragic happens. And I appreciate you mentioning Commissioner Willie, and I will do that for him next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, they're basing it on more than just not the UGB, they're basing it on the traffic count and the speed counts they've done. So it just may be worth a discussion that, we'd like to see the formula revisited, in this instance.
Thank you.
Mhm.
May I suggest too that, those residents, Sunset Ridge or that area, since we will have a closed year on April 17th, if they're going to come to the meeting and actually provide a testimony. That might also help. So. Any other reports?
My first comment is in regards to the Joint Water Commission, just making sure that we don't entangle ourselves in a monopoly. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to find those alternative sources, but we can't be held hostage by that group. They're pretty aggressive. So, I hope we continue to look at those things. It sounds like we might be, so we'll encourage that. The other thing is, I appreciate the infographics. And I think one thing we can do as a city is give our folks more of the infographics. And even in our 101, I think in a lot of cases, a lot of folks aren't going to read it. But if you give me the infographics that bring home the points about, you can't cover everything in an infographic, but I would encourage that to maybe be expanded to some degree, because I think there are a lot of folks who just don't know. They don't read. We send out information, they still are somewhat clueless because they just don't take the time or make the effort to learn about what it is. Why do we have so many cars parked in some of our newer developments? And those things are, not all things that are controlled by us specifically. And the sizes of lots and how subdivisions and how the state standards apply to what we can control and what we can't control. So I would encourage more of the infographics where possible. And one further comment. I believe West Union is inside our city limits. Correct? It's a county road, but it's inside of our city limits.
It is, except for Stewart Lane, the area that's the Van Dalen properties, that southern half, the southern half of the road is not within our road boundary. It was the same, very complicated, but I don't know if you remember this procedure, but when we had to do this with North Avenue, when we took over jurisdiction there, a certain portion of it was not within the UGB, and we had to do some sort of code amendment and work with DLCD to bring in that little chunk. Same with Gordon Road. The western half of it would not be within the UGB. The right half is. So someone could it's. That's
And that's why I just would encourage you to look at the latest statutes. There's been some changes in what a jurisdiction can do. So a city has maybe perhaps a little more control over the county than the county will, in other words, I'd want to make sure that we have, we're using the bulk of the statute to enforce what we want to enforce. And I think there's been enough changes there. We can actually probably do it, but we have to look into it to make sure, because I know there's been some fairly recent changes in it. So.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's worth following up on. And it just made me think too, it may be worth some folks popping into a Board of Commissioners meeting at some point, just bringing this up, because all of us can tell you when someone shows up to testify and everyone looks at us saying, what are you going to do about it? We go, we'll get on that tomorrow, so just another piece.
Any other comments or questions? Maybe council reports.
This is my council report. Is it unclear on going to the banks? City? And, on Thursday, when is everybody else in the go?
I would try. I'm not going to
See that whether she's still in the city. She did last year.
I didn't focus on.
Any other council reports?
Well, if you would like to say, I'm true, most of the time I find negative news everywhere, okay? So the other night, I thought it was to say that the city of North Plains, and this is really inviting and positive. I'm so happy because that's a wonderful job. And I'm gonna count on thank you for that. Okay, I wasn't there, but you did a good job.
I wasn't either, and I lived in, recording.
Well, and, thank you, and Andy at the Korean also, had a huge lift in that as well. Because, they were the ones who executed a lot of the verbiage, in the state, but thank you to Andy and for their work as well.
If you, as an individual, give that positive outlet, so that was very.
Anyone else?
The next meeting, I will be just back in town just that day, but I'll be driving from Las Vegas, so I won't be able to make it because I can't do my homework. So next meeting I will not be here.
Okay, thanks for the heads up. And then last week I was in DC and it was a nice trip. We had good weather, had some good, interesting, meetings. We did have the Oregon delegates. We were able to meet with all the Oregon delegates on Tuesday, which is very good. So we went to the Capitol and we had, several of us had, speaking parts, but we met with Salinas and Vance and Blumenauer and Chavez de Reamer, Bonamici, Coyle, Whiting, and Merkley. So we actually had all of them come to us. There were about 70 of us in a room. So they actually came to us one at a time. Except for Bonamici, we had that. I actually had we had our meeting on the steps of the Capitol because she was in voting and couldn't get out of voting in time. So Mayors Wenzel from Forest Grove and Mayor Callaway and myself actually had her ear, on the state capitol, so on the steps of the capitol, which is really nice. But we talked about, infrastructure, broadband, housing, FEMA and the CHIPS Act. So, we had, let's see, Hillsborough had their youth delegates, Tiger had their youth delegates. And some of those kids were just amazing, amazing high school students. And some of the questions that they were asking were just incredible. They were tough questions. And I'm glad they asked them, you know, I mean, it really put some of those folks on the spot. So, you know, having the mayor stand up and other city councilors stand up and answer their questions, that's one thing, but you know, when you've got 16, 17-year-old, you know, kids standing up there and firing these questions to these bureaucrats, you know, and they're like, yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome. I commend those two groups of kids. That was pretty neat. So, but it was a good experience, and I was really glad to go. So, you know, home on Tuesday night, so that was good. So, all right, anything else? If not, I'll go ahead and close the city council meeting at 8 o'clock. And hang tight, and we're gonna talk to you.